everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I have a trash to treasure video where I'll be transforming 4 different items from my local thrift store into some really beautiful farmhouse style pieces. Today I'm also teaming up with a few of my DIY friends here on YouTube for a collaboration that I'll let you know a little bit more information about later on in the video. Now let's get right into today's projects. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be transforming a cutting board that I picked up from Goodwill. It was pretty large and I knew that I would be able to turn it into something really great. It was kind of already beat up a little bit, which was nice because that goes perfect with the rustic farmhouse decor that I currently have in my home. To transform the piece, I first started by painting the entire cutting board with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I did do 3 different coats of this paint to get everything covered up really nicely. Once all of those coats of paint were dry, I wanted to give this piece a distressed look, so I used some sandpaper and I started by sanding around all of the edges first, and then I knew that I wanted to have a few pieces or places on the front sanded down so that the natural wood color would come through. The sandpaper that I'm using is 100 grit, so since I did 3 coats of paint, I really had to sand through that paint. I really wish I would have had a 60 or 80 grit. It would have made things so much easier and I would have spent less time sanding. Now that I have my cutting board all painted and distressed, I'm using this stencil that I picked up from Joann Fabrics. It did come in a pack of stencils and I will try to have it linked down in the description box if it's still available. I am only going to be using the wreath part of this stencil. I just centered it right on my cutting board, and then to hold it into place, I'm using some painter's tape on the top and the bottom of the stencil. To stencil my wreath, I'm using my Dollar Tree stencil brush and the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. Anytime I'm stenciling, I like to use my fingers to hold down the stencil right around the areas where I'm painting, and I do like to build up the color instead of using a lot of paint all at once on my paintbrush. This helps from any bleeding, and you can also use Mod Podge on your project before you put your stencil down and then paint over top of it. That will also help with bleeding, but I usually just skip the Mod Podge step and go right to stenciling because I'm a little impatient. After I have my wreath all painted, I did wait for it to dry before removing my stencil. I'm also going to be using this rooster from the stencil pack that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. I want to say this was $2.99 or either $3.49, and then I paid 30% off of that price. I'm putting my rooster right in the center of the wreath, and then I'm securing it with painter's tape on all 4 sides. To paint on my rooster, I'm using that same Dollar Tree stencil brush and that same Rich Black chalk paint, and I'm doing the same thing as I normally do. I build up the paint a little bit at a time, just putting a little bit on my brush. And I knew with this rooster, if there was some of that white color peeking through the black, it was going to be okay because it would give me more of a vintage look. Once the paint was all dry, I then removed the stencil. For the last step in this project, I'm using some of this rope and I strung it through the hole that was in the top of the handle on this cutting board, and then I just cut it down to the size that I wanted it to be and made a knot. Here is my cutting board all transformed. Obviously this is just a decor piece. I love how it turned out and it goes perfect with all of the farmhouse decor I have in my kitchen. Before we get into the second project today, I do want to talk a little bit about today's Trash to Treasure hop. I'm collaborating with 5 of my good DIY friends, and today's collaboration is hosted by Lisa from Living My Best Life with Lisa Marie. We're also collaborating with Savannah from Savvy Crafts with Savannah, Jamie, the crafty DIY guy, also collaborating with Lisa Kennedy from Dollar Mom, and last but certainly not least, Jenny from Lovely Moments Creating. How the hop works is once you're done watching my video, you'll go to the link that I'll have listed in my description box so that you can head on over to the next friend's video to see which trash item they were able to turn into treasure. Now for the second DIY and transformation today, I'm going to be making over this washboard that I picked up from Goodwill. This was $3.99 and I couldn't believe that somebody would take this vintage washboard and just glue all these random things onto it, but I knew that I could make it look really cute in my farmhouse laundry room. So what I first started doing was just peeling off this like rooster that they had, I think, super glued on, and then also some of these like little paper cutouts and this country word. I just peeled that right off. Some of that glue that was on the actual like washboard part was kind of hard to get off. I didn't have any Goo Gone or anything like that. I'm completely out. So what I ended up using was just some acetone nail polish remover. I just poured a bunch of it on a cotton pad and then just saturated all of the glue, and I let it sit there for quite a while, and then I just scrubbed it off, and it seemed to work pretty good. Next, I'm painting all of the wood on my washboard with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I did do 2 coats of this paint. You'll see here I have some painter's tape down on the metal part, but I ended up not really needing to use that, so I didn't bother putting it on the rest of it. For any paint that I did get on the metal part, I just used that same acetone nail polish remover on a Q-tip and just removed it. Now I'm adding some distressing to my washboard. I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Java on one of my Dollar Tree stencil brushes, and I'm very lightly just dry brushing this color over top of all of the parts of the washboard that I've painted with the plaster color paint, and this is just going to give me a more of a rustic look that you guys know I love so much. For this project, I did already cut out this laundry self-service vinyl from my Cricut machine, and I'm just going to be transferring that onto my washboard. I originally was going to use a stencil from Hobby Lobby that said laundry, but the stencil ended up being just a little bit too big for the space on my washboard, so I couldn't use it, and I ended up just going with this one from Cricut, and this is a Cricut like self-made one. They have this right on the Cricut design space already made for you. Originally for this project, I was just gonna leave it like that with the vinyl, but then I went back a day later and decided to add some of these mini clothespins. I'm using 4 of them, and I'm painting them with that Folk Art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. I did 1 coat of this paint on all 4 of the clothespins, and then I used a double piece of jute. I just measured that for the length of my washboard to go across the very top of it. I cut that down to size, and then on each end of the 2 pieces of jute, I just tied them together in a knot, and this is just going to help me be able to put the pin through the jute a little bit better. The pins I'm going to be using to hold my jute into place are these brass push pins that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. They came in a pack of pins, and I've had them in my craft stash forever. I just thought that they would be really nice to add to this project. What I'm doing is just pressing the pins into the knots that I've already made on the piece of jute and then hammering them into the wood. Then, because I wanted the push pins to match the rest of my project, I decided to paint the top of them with that Rich Black chalk paint. For the last step in this project, I'm attaching all 4 of those painted clothespins to my strung piece of jute on the front of my washboard, and I just used a little bit of hot glue on the back side of each clothespin. And this is the washboard all transformed. I think it turned out super cute. It is way more my style. I wasn't really feeling the country glue-on vibes that the previous owner had going on, and I know that this is definitely going to be a piece I display in my laundry room. Moving right along to the 3rd project today, I'm going to be transforming this fruit basket that I picked up from Goodwill. These are always great to do so many different kinds of projects with. This one I only paid 99 cents for, so I knew I had to get it when I saw the price. For this one, I started by removing the handle on the basket. I knew that I did not want the handle to be on here, so I kind of had a hard time getting it off. I ended up trying to pry it off with a butter knife, and that really wasn't working. And then I tried getting it off with some pliers. I was able to finally get it off, but I could not get the little push pin things on the sides off. But I knew that I was going to be covering those up with fabric, so I ended up just leaving them on. Then I started painting my basket with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. You guys will probably notice I'm using this color in all 4 of my projects today. I really love this color. And I did 1 coat of this paint on my entire basket, even the bottom of the basket. I wasn't too worried if some of that wood color showed through the white, because that's just less distressing that I would have to do, and I really like a distressed look to a lot of my home decor. I know I said I painted my entire basket. I did not paint the entire basket because I left the inside of the basket that wood color because I'm gonna have fabric on the inside of the basket, so that really doesn't need to be painted. After the paint was all dry, I then took some of this striped fabric that I had in my craft stash and I just started seeing about how much of it I would need to go on the inside of my basket. This is from Hobby Lobby last year. I believe they still have this fabric. I really love it so much. It's just a staple if you are into farmhouse decor. It's good to have on hand for crafts. So once I cut my fabric down a little bit, I wasn't really sure how I was gonna attach it to my basket, if I was gonna staple it, but I ended up going with hot glue. So what I did was folded the fabric over, placed the hot glue on that folded edge of the fabric, and then just pressed it onto the basket to hold it into place and for it to be attached. And I continued that step around the entire top edge of my basket. But once I got around like halfway through my basket, I realized that my stripes were gonna end up being like horizontal instead of vertical, like I've already been gluing them on. So I just had to cut some of that fabric down a little bit and just stick it into the basket and then take a new strip of that fabric and then just start over on the other side. And then you really couldn't see where the two fabrics met together. There was a little bit of a line, but you really can't see it. I wasn't too worried about it. I continued gluing my fabric to the top of my basket until I had the fabric going all the way around. I thought it would be cute to add some extra detail to this basket, so I'm adding some of this nautical rope to the very top of the basket, right over top of that striped fabric. I'm using hot glue to attach it. I just put the hot glue right on the fabric at the top of the basket and then pressed on my rope. Once I got all the way back around on my basket, I cut my rope and then I tried to glue it down as close as I could to my beginning piece of rope so that there wouldn't be any noticeable seams. Then I decided I wanted to add some more rope, so I'm attaching rope on the bottom of the fabric. The same as I did the top rope, I'm just adding hot glue onto the basket right underneath my fabric and then pressing on my rope. Now I tried to keep my seams all in the same place where they start and end so that that can be the back side of my basket and you really won't be able to see it. For a basket like this one, you can pretty much display anything you want in it. You can do florals, you can do books and magazines, towels, all kinds of different things. But I personally decided I wanted to add some of these really pretty spring florals since we are getting into springtime. And then I added some of my vintage rolling pins and I'm gonna be displaying them on my countertop. For the last finishing touch on my project, I'm adding this unfinished wood word cutout that says gather. This is from Hobby Lobby. It came in a pack of a bunch of different unfinished wood words, and I'm staining it with my Craft Smart wood stain in the color brown. Once I have it all stained, I'm then adding a piece of jute that's gonna be doubled. I just doubled it up, cut it down to size, and then tied a knot on the end. The knot part, I'm hot gluing to the back side of the H on the word gather. I'm then using some hot glue to attach both of those end jute pieces on the inside of my basket. And then I did use a little bit of hot glue to attach the jute on the front of my basket as well. And here is my basket all made over. What I love about this one is you can use it in pretty much any room of your house to display all different kinds of things. So I know I'll be getting a ton of use out of this. Now moving into the fourth and final project today, I'll be making over this wood cutting board that I picked up from Goodwill. I paid $3.99 for it. And what I loved about this one is it has the wedge on the bottom, which I knew would make for a perfect sign or just something that could be standing. So that's what I'll be doing today. I'm going to be transforming this piece into a chalkboard. To start out, I used painter's tape around the entire inside because that part is going to be where I make my chalkboard part, and then the rest of it I can paint another color. Now that I have all of my painter's tape applied, I can now start painting the rest of my chalkboard, and this I'm using my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I did 2 coats of this paint on all of the wood portions on the outside of where I used the painter's tape. Then for the back side, it did have these like little sticky things for when it was a cutting board. I just used a butter knife to peel those off, and then I did paint this back side with the same 2 coats of that Waverly paint in the color Plaster. Then once all of my paint was dry, I used my folk art chalk paint in the color Castle, and I dry brushed that over all of the parts where I painted the plaster color. This is just giving my piece a little bit of a distressed vintage look. Since I have my main color on the outside all painted, I can now remove my painter's tape from the inside where I'm going to be making my chalkboard. For the chalkboard portion, I'm just putting the paint right on where I'm going to be making a chalkboard. I ended up putting way too much paint on, so I should have just put a little bit on and then brushed it on a little bit at a time, but I didn't, so I just had to wipe a bunch of the paint off that was on my brush and then try to smooth it out as smooth as I could possibly get it. I did do 2 different coats of this chalkboard paint, and I did let it dry about an hour in between each coat. And this is the Martha Stewart chalkboard paint in this gray color. I've had this for a really long time, so I'm not even sure if they make it anymore, but I do know that Dollar Tree sells chalkboard paint now. I'm adding the word Farmhouse to the bottom of my chalkboard. I'm using these unfinished wood letters. These ones I believe are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm staining them with my Craftsmart wood stain in the color brown, and I only did 1 coat of this stain on all of my letters. As you can see, I have like a distressing underneath where I'm going to be gluing my letters. I actually already glued the letters on and they were not center, so I had to peel them off, and then instead of repainting, I thought it would be really cute to just add some distressing, so I sanded over where I had originally glued them. But right now I'm just re-gluing all of the letters that spell Farmhouse on. I placed hot glue on the back side of each letter and then just pressed them on the bottom of my chalkboard. Then I'm using some sandpaper to sand away some of those coats of paint that I painted right over top of the magnetic strip that was originally on the cutting board. I thought it would be cute to have some distressing underneath the word Farmhouse, and I did want that magnetic strip to show a little bit because I'm going to be adding a magnet with a chalkboard pen. This chalkboard pen is from Dollar Tree, and I used one of the Dollar Tree magnets and I just hot glued them together, and then there you have it. You have a chalkboard pen attached to your chalkboard. My chalkboard part is all finished, but I thought it would be really cute to add a small wreath to the front of it. So I'm using one of my grapevine wreaths that I already had in my craft stash, and some of these boxwood stems from Walmart and these mini white flowers from Hobby Lobby. I just cut and tore them down so the stems were really small, and then I hot glued them to one side of my wreath. To make the hanger for my wreath, I'm using some of this cream color and green ribbon that I just recently picked up from Walmart. It was in with all of their spring decor. I'm cutting the ribbon down for the length that I want it to be, and then it was a little bit too thick for my size wreath, so I'm cutting both ends of that off to make the ribbon a little bit smaller. And then I hot glued the 2 ends of the ribbon together at the very top. To attach my wreath, I folded my ribbon over along the back side of my chalkboard, and then I used a push pin and just nailed that ribbon right to the back of my chalkboard. This way I can change out the wreath for different seasons or just remove it entirely. Here's my chalkboard all finished. I think it looks super cute with a wreath on it, and I can always take it off if I want to later on. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, I hope that you will consider subscribing. Please be sure to go down in the description box and click on the link so that you can head on over to the next friend's video to find out which items they turned from trash into treasure. Thank you guys so much for watching.